I know I've got more on biology coming up. Must be in this part. Okay. The earlier map showed that there's different kinds of Haskap. And this is a generality. I'm sure if breeders really worked hard at it, you could get one that doesn't fit this. But when I was testing all our germplasm, I tended to, by the way, this is a Russian one thrown in that picture by mistake. The good one, most of the Russian ones have rounder fruit, taller bushes, and they tend to be larger. The worst thing, though, about them is they can have uneven ripening, right? So and that's bad on a crop that they all look purple, and some are purple and bright, and some are purple and green and taste grassy. And then this is how you look at it. If you're an optimistic or pessimistic person, this is going to be good or bad. Like they bloom later and ripen later. Well, that's good if your conditions are that your plant wants to wake up too soon. It's better to have it bloom later. Flavors can be good or bad. The fruit tends to hold on stronger. When I visited Japan, like every berry picked made the branch bend down before it would come off, right? Well, that might be okay for the machine that can pull it, but if it's a pick your own, that's a little irritating, right? You don't want it to have that much force. So it depends on whether you think that's good or bad. Here's plants of a Japanese variety where showing some were completely ripe and some were completely green. Now ecologically for the plant, that kind of makes sense because it can have berries ripening for a long period of time. The birds would visit over a long period of time. But it doesn't make sense for us wanting to harvest them quickly. Now, there is another program in North America, and Maxine Thompson in Oregon she's actually tried Russian varieties, but they don't work well in her area. So her germplasm and varieties are mostly Japanese, and she's been cooperating with me for years. She's got varieties about to be released as soon as she gets plant patents on them, and so you may want to try some of those. They will tend to be a little bit later harvest than the early varieties, but I believe she's been paying attention to evenness of ripening. The other strategy, if you have uneven ripening but the plant can hold onto its fruit, then it can all catch up, right? So that's something else to consider. But I would certainly, in this region, I would certainly be wanting to try some of hers when they come out. Here's pictures I took in Hokkaido. These are the largest ones at the point I'd ever seen at this one farm. But there's some of the wild ones. There's what was in the grocery store. That's probably a little more than a pint container. Maybe it's a half liter. And there's some large ones there. It's quite variable. We have some that are bigger than that now. The Russian varieties, a generality, and this is our first varieties, one of the first ones we got from the Vavilov Institute. They're all long and skinny fruit, which is part of the reason why they ripen quickly, is because they get more sunlight per ounce of berry than the round fat ones. So they tend to be very even ripening, because the Russians, and my thought is that they had bred for the earliest possible fruit. It's like if you especially when I think of my family, we're like a tomato competitive family. Who got the first tomato was like a big win for which one of my uncles or aunts won. And so I think they really got into breeding for the first Haskap you could possibly get, right? So they evolved to be naturally long and thin if they wanted that as a major goal. Trouble with a long, thin fruit, it dehydrates for us. Any long fruit like that, even if it's on a bush, it's kind of rare for them to hold on strongly. They will dehydrate in July for us from the heat, because so the fruit tends to drop quickly, and many of these are susceptible to mildew. So early bloom, early ripening, variable flavors. Some of them taste really good. Just some need a little sugar, but that's pretty good. Now the first two varieties, we had 4 varieties in 1999, and we said these were some of the best 2. What happened was, they had an original name. This one's check number 17 from some guy's backyard, right? And this one's Tomichka, one of the first varieties ever bred in Russia. When they came over to North America, they got renamed to Berry Blue and Bluebell, and then the guy who released them didn't want anyone to use his name without paying him a royalty. So that caused several companies in Canada to rename them further, right? And I think there's two more for each of these beyond this name. So I once had an amateur call me up, an avid amateur, and say, I've got all the Haskap in Canada. And he laid off the names, and he said, I said, you've got 2 varieties. And the next year, some of the companies no longer called them anything. I think he went around to each company giving them hell, and so he squashed some of that. But yeah, this one, the polar ones, really ticked me off because they sounded kind of northern, like our Borealis and Tundra, and people thought it was my new variety. So they were calling, oh, I hear you've got new varieties. And I go, oh, you got Polar Jewel? That's the oldest variety in the world. Anyway. So we tried 16 varieties on a trial that they were producing in 2006 through 9, right? The average berry weight of the varieties ranged from 0.5 gram to 1 gram, right? We chose the 5 best for breeding. Now, some of these I've read in other papers got 1.6 grams, but it's the same variety, and we have really clay soil, so. But anyway, I'm not too impressed with the size of the varieties we have, but this is all in time, right? This is like 12 years ago. There could be, I'm sure there's better things in Russia now, and we may not have gotten the best at the time. Now there's another type, the Kurile Haskap, and Blue Velvet is one of those. Is anyone growing that? They're large, round fruit, very sweet or low acid, very strong, not string. Very strong branches, very sturdy, and it's practically immune to mildew. The bad thing is the bushes are kind of short and they hardly make any fruit. And very low flavor aroma. They have the sweetness. They're the last to bloom, very late ripening, and the fruit holds on very strongly. Of our varieties, Borealis is more like this one than others, except Borealis has a lot more fruit than the Kurile types. What we've been doing, so seeing all that list, we've been trying to make hybrids to combine the best attributes of each kind, right? Our first varieties were Kurile times Russian hybrids, and what they generally are have great fruit quality. I had some of the leading people in Japan taste my fruit when I brought it over there, and the leading distributor stood up and said, this is the best Haskap I've ever had, right? But he has uneven ripening fruit, right? So he has a grassy one for everyone that tastes right. So anyway, ours tend to be great fruit quality, productive. They're actually ripening at the right time, uniformly. Disease resistant mid-season. Bad is that they're not as tall as I would like. The next generation, though, is starting to have all 3 combos. So we really want, for a while, we might not have one of these things in there, but that's what we're aiming for, and we're getting closer and closer to the ideal. This is an example. This is one of the indigos, I forget which one. But the first one, I'd been playing with Haskap to see whether it was worth breeding it. And crossing these long, skinny ones with short, round ones from the Kuriles, I got long, fat berries that were bigger than either parent, right? So that was a breakthrough. Also, this one, remember, this is sweet but kind of boring flavor. And these tended to have great flavor, but not that sweet. So it had a real good blend of flavor and sweetness. And this was actually a type of hybridization no breeder would make in his right mind. It's only a scatterbrained professor who's saying, I wonder what would happen if we take this unproductive thing that doesn't have much quality and cross it to this other one that looks a little better. And to see the hybrid exhibit almost always the best attributes was really exciting. That's what really geared me into breeding Haskap, that it was something we can do better. Now here's an example of some of the hybrids from different years. Somebody in Germany, we have these plant breeders' rights documents where you have to describe your berries. An expert in Germany had said there's 3 shapes of Haskap. They're cylindrical, oval, or round. And I went, no! So I went out and took a berry from every bush in our new field, and then I sorted them by size, and here they are all facing stem up. So we have like this weird shape here, we've got a little plug like Bam Bam, we've got pencils, we've got lumpy guys, right? And I sent this photo into a Guinness Book of World Records and said, could we have this as the most variable shaped berry? And they said, no, we don't do things like that. That's too hard to measure. So it's really quite possible to have a huge variety of things. This was a little bit later. See, we switched from quarters to loonies to do side. Now we're doing toonies, but actually a toonie isn't too much bigger than a loony anyway, but it looks more impressive. So the size is getting really larger, and we're probably for machines, you want something a little more curved edge. Any of these little points could get damaged a bit, but maybe it doesn't matter. So our first varieties, I call them row 9, that's where the row 9 that we're in, and they had numbers like this, right? And they since have gotten names. Tundra was considered the favorite for commercial growers because it was highly unique. It was one of the few that when we whacked it with our hands and then threw it in the sorting machine, which has a dump like 1.5 feet through the fan, nothing bled. It was all intact. It looked great. It almost looked like hand-picked. That was extremely rare. Borealis was our favorite for home garden. And the reason we only said home gardener was it holds on so tightly, and if you pick it a little too early, it rips off the plant and leaves and you can't see the fruit. I was under the delusion and that maybe the birds won't see it. But they do learn eventually. At least the neighbor kids won't see it if it's in your backyard. We actually had our original Haskap in the alleyway, and the little girls in the backyard were always picking them, right? But anyway, and the indigos were considered our backups in case they were easier to propagate, which turned out to be true. The indigos, 2 of the indigos, were easier to propagate than Tundra, so our suppliers already had lots of Indigo Gem, and the Tundras are a little slower to root. So there's, in our original taste panel, Borealis got the Best Flavor Award. But it won by 1 vote, but that 1 vote was someone who was really conscientious, scrutinizing things. We called him in to break the tie, right? But it's kind of delicate, hard to pick. Even though it says home garden, does not mean you should do pick your own with it, because your pick your own people, it's going to be slower for them to find that fruit. It really hides it, right? So some people say, oh, well, if it's home garden, we can have a pick your own, but I wouldn't advise that. So Tundra had the 2nd largest fruit in that family, and the 2nd best flavor, very durable, so I said that was, and the word Tundra sounds more rugged, right? No one gave me a pickup truck, though, or anything. So you'll notice Young doesn't get that much treatment for a photo because that was even harder to propagate, and hardly anyone has that anymore. So we kind of lost track of what that one was like. But Indigo Gem in Saskatchewan, that seems to be more productive. When I saw last year and the year before, I observed on our field where we had like 60 of each variety, it seemed like they had the same number of flowers, but I think bees like Indigo Gem a little bit more than Tundra, because it seemed like the gem got pollinated better. in the Maritimes, they're really liking indigo treat. They're saying that's the best one. But a yield thing in southern Ontario by the Ministry of Agriculture said Tundra was the highest yield. So I think it's variable what people are getting on the first varieties. Now, Haskap has to have cross-pollination, right? It's not going to do it by wind, certainly, but they need two compatible varieties, genetically compatible, and they have to bloom at the same time. When we do hybridizations in the breeding program, most combinations work 80% of the time. It's not like a giant issue that if you have a few varieties and you don't know what they are, they'll probably work. It's whether they bloom at the same time. And most of our fruits are actually like that. But it seems like I have to tell people that that's really true, because people who have one apple tree in their backyard, the neighbor has an apple tree too, and they don't realize it has to have cross-pollination. So we rushed out to get honeybee Haskap, and that was like an interim gap. Honeybee has a longer, thinner berry. It holds onto its fruit. It's really fast growing. And I was wondering if it might be a bird alternative, because one of the things that birds like to do with Haskap, especially the cedar waxwings, they'll dive into a bush, they'll eat berries, but they'll drop 9, for every berry they eat, they drop 9 on the ground, right? If they would just go to the ground and be polite and pick up their food, it wouldn't be so bad. So honeybee doesn't drop its fruit. So my idea was, well, what if you planted that in your outer row, and the birds tend to love the outer row the most, and if it didn't drop it, then it would stay there longer eating the fruit. So I don't know if anyone's tried that yet. It also had a different kind of mouthfeel. I wonder if it might be good for wine. And I'm not a wine expert, but I've gone to a few conferences and talked to people. To me, mouthfeel is sort of like, almost like a slight bitterness on the edge of your awareness. You know, and it feels like it's slightly carbonated to me. That's my description of it. And honeybee has a little bit like that. You know, so I wonder if it might be better for wine. But it has that long, narrow shape, so it's probably going to ripen earlier than some of the other ones. Well, we kept looking for a better variety to be pollinator. And so we came up with Aurora, but now I think Aurora, the other ones ought to be the pollinator for Aurora, not Aurora being the pollinator. And a lot of times, I mentioned it, I think, in one of the web articles, that you tend to call something a pollinator if you don't really like it, right? But really, they're both companion plants. We should have a little more togetherness, right? Little companion plants. Aurora is about 50% bigger per fruit, and the bush is about 50% bigger, and it grows faster, and I think it's going to be more productive. People that have been growing Haskap for a while, tried Aurora in our field, said it was the sweetest Haskap they ever had. But if you take it to the laboratory, you find out its average sweetness, it's the lowest acidity Haskap they've ever had. It's about half as acid as the other varieties, right? So that would have a specialty use maybe for fresh or certain things that you don't want a lot of acidity. But when you make jam and some fruit juices and stuff like that, you want more acidity. So maybe it's not good for that. You'd have to do a little R&D research whether you want low acidity. But it blooms completely in sync with these other varieties, right? Some of the varieties, like the Russian varieties, if you grew a Russian variety with Tundra and Indigo Gem, the Russian variety would stop blooming maybe 3 or 4 days before Tundra and Indigo Gem stopped blooming. So you might not get the last berries pollinated as well, if there's not overlap.